So I've been thinking a lot about my favorite Digidestined, who happens to be from Digimon Adventure 02, Motomiya Daisuke. The title probably clues you in on this being a positive review of the character, but most people probably wouldn't have guessed he's anyone's favorite. He's certainly one of the more controversial characters in the series. That is to say, Digimon fans in the English-speaking community either love him or hate him. Mostly hate. Something really interesting about Digimon is that while I think the English dub was actually really fun and maintained a lot of the darker, heavier themes in the original text, it does still make a lot of changes that mess with the tone of the original story. And one of the biggest victims of these changes was Daisuke. I won't get into how all of the added jokes and censored out or cut content, Digimon the movie, affected the overall story. There are other essays for that, but I do want to talk about the differences in how the English dub chose to present his character, affected not only the viewer's perception of him, but also the final act of the story. If you're open to it, I hope you'll learn something new today. For the sake of time, I'm going to stick mostly to the series and ignore the movie. But if you've only seen the English Digimon the movie, I really recommend that you watch Hurricane Touchdown, The Golden Digimentals for a better read on Daisuke. The English adaptation absolutely butchered the script and his character in particular. So, back to the series. We're introduced to Daisuke in Adventure 02 as the goggle-wearing soccer fanatic who idolizes Taichi. He goes on to take over the leader position of the team. But while Taichi was generally well-liked by the other Digidestined and the fan community, Daisuke got a very different response. He was pretty much immediately written off as a lovesick idiot meant only for comic relief. I think the original Japanese version, however, tried to present a more nuanced understanding of him. The core of his personality is the same, but the Japanese dub has far more instances in which the context puts it in a different light. When we're introduced to Daisuke, he's Hikari's friend and classmate. He also very obviously has a little crush on her, and he's wary of Takeru, who has just arrived on the scene. Of course, without any background knowledge, he seems like a bit of a brat. But we can see through his interactions with the other characters that, at this point in the story, he has a hard time getting along with anyone other than Hikari. In fact, in the episode with the Digimental of Friendship, he is the only member of the team hesitant to pick it up. When pressed to do so, he admits to not understanding friendship, and implies he doesn't have any friends. Even as the other Digidestined get to know him, he's often made the butt of their jokes, and no one really takes him very seriously. So why doesn't Daisuke have friends? I think it comes down to his pure personality. And when I say pure here, I don't mean innocent. Just that Daisuke is a very simple character. He's single-minded, and it's true and is true to himself and his values. Think about anyone you've met who was very stubborn about having things a certain way. It's probably a bit difficult to get along with them at times, right? But this stubborn will is admirable in a lot of boyhood heroes, if channeled in the right way. And this is the basis for how he becomes the savior of everyone by the end of the show. The original text has plenty of jokes at Daisuke's expense, don't get me wrong, but it's there to establish his personality at the beginning. One interpretation of why Daisuke is so loud and outspoken is that he's constantly seeking to be recognized and validated. That's why he craves Taichi's approval and won't stop hanging around Hikari, because she's one of the few people that looks his way. I think the strongest case for this read on him is the episode where he plays a soccer match against Ken, not knowing that he's the Digimon Kaiser. As Hikari points out, though Daisuke lost, he isn't frustrated. He's just happy that Ken remembered his name and leaves the field basking in that bit of recognition. For Daisuke, the Digimon Adventure 02 story is really about coming into his role as a leader, gaining confidence so that he no longer needs outside validation, and proving his worth at the end. The English dub fails to carry him through this journey because it peppers in so many extra jokes just to make fun of him. It's hard for the viewers to see his growth because they're constantly reminded that he's stupid. But simply looking at all the things Daisuke accomplishes throughout Adventure 02, there is significant growth. Let's start with the arc that best shows how Daisuke's personality at the beginning achieves something that only he could have done. I think everyone can agree that Ken is the most developed character of 02, and Daisuke's role in his development cannot be understated. Daisuke and Ken have one of the strongest bonds among this cast of characters. In the sequence when Paildramon was formed, if the sequence when Paildramon was formed wasn't enough to prove it. While they're literally running and jumping, matching each other move for move, their hearts beating as one, their bond is constantly reinforced throughout the series. But it wasn't just eyes meet sparks fly, they really had to work for it. That is, Daisuke had to work for it. After Ken realizes how awful he's been as the Digimon Kaiser, he makes the choice to take accountability for his actions by destroying the Dark Towers. The other Digidestined become aware of this, but still make no effort to reach out to him. That is, except for Daisuke. In fact, even before this, Daisuke goes to every member of the group to ask if they can invite Ken to join their team. When he can't get their approval, he invites Ken anyway. Why? Because Ken has just helped them, and while everyone is still questioning who he is based on his actions in the past, Daisuke makes his choices based on what he sees in front of him. Daisuke also takes the initiative and saves Ken during this arc. Ken is still battling with his own guilt over what he's done. He works from the shadows, trying to carry the weight of his responsibility alone. When things get too hard, he gets ready to sacrifice himself to atone for what he did. But Daisuke, being true to one of his core values of believing in others even when they don't believe in themselves, literally slaps some sense into him. He tells him the words he needs to hear in that moment to snap him out of his misery, essentially saving his life, and this won't be the last time he does it either. Now, I don't believe it's a coincidence that these two have one of the most fleshed out relationships in the series. They actually have a bit in common, and there are scenes that mirror each other, showing a mutual understanding between the two of them. First, both shared struggles as children to get attention and recognition. You can see this is somewhat hinted at when Ken comes over for a sleepover, and Daisuke's family fawns over him, comparing his intelligence to Daisuke's lack thereof. And in this case, Ken is the one being fussed over, while Daisuke is being disregarded and overlooked. Perhaps the reason Daisuke reached out to Ken was because he knew what it was like on the other side. Now that he has his own friend group, he's trying to give someone else the chance to have the same. Recall that Daisuke was handed the responsibility of being leader by Taichi himself. Taking the lead and offering someone else that chance to prove himself implies that Daisuke recognizes the change in himself after he became a Digidestined. Now, back to the English dubbing problem. There are many small scenes with little hints of his simple-minded generosity and insightfulness that were either not translated or deliberately overridden for a joke. For example, at the Christmas party, Hikari points out that this is the first time they've seen Ken smile. But having spent so much time with Ken, Daisuke has probably seen him smile plenty, so he expresses surprise at her claim. The English has him being jealous that Ken caught Kari's attention. When they part ways later that night, the others point out how much Ken has changed, but when Daisuke is the only one who recognizes that Ken has always been there, the English dub went with a joke about kissing Hikari under the mistletoe instead. I'm not bitter. Ken mirrors this in his own quiet way later. After the world tour, the others make surprised faces at an insightful comment by Daisuke, but Ken only looks on and smiles. This is Ken recognizing a side of Daisuke that the others were not used to yet. The English dub messed this one up completely, just taking a dig at Daisuke for the sake of it. It's not only Ken that acknowledges Daisuke. When Daisuke makes his case to Taichi for going to Ken first, rather than grouping up with the team when the Digimon enter the real world, we get to see how his approach to leadership compares to Taichi's. Actually, remember how he carries both the crests of friendship and courage? This scene reminds me of the fight in Season 1, when Taichi and Yamato wanted to take different routes to save their friends. Yamato wants to go look for their friends first, while Taichi wants to go ahead towards Server Island. Daisuke shows the part of him that's a little bit more like Yamato here, and Taichi is again looking at the big picture, while Daisuke is looking at the immediate problem of Ken being left alone. It should be noted that Taichi ends up acknowledging Daisuke's perspective and letting him go. The English dub did keep this part mostly intact, but because of all of the other scenes surrounding this one in which Daisuke's thoughtfulness is written out, it's really easy to overlook, and it becomes a detriment to Daisuke's personal character arc. If Daisuke had been taken seriously enough that he was allowed to show growth and change in the same way some of the other cast members were, viewers could more easily accept that the team needed him in order to defeat Final Phase Vandemon. I'm gonna call him that because his real name is just too freaking long. It's finally time to see how the final battle plays out in Daisuke's role. Final Phase Vandemon's last big move is to trap everyone in a fantasy inspired by their personal hangups. Daisuke is the only one unaffected because he doesn't have any hangups. That allows him to remain focused on the immediate problem, so he's the only one that Final Phase Vandemon can't manipulate with feelings of self-doubt. Again, Daisuke has self-doubts at the beginning, and this shows how far he's come. Because the English dub constantly undermines him by adding jokes at his expense, not all viewers could take him seriously when it came time for the big finale. We didn't get to see how the other characters' opinions of him changed over time because lines written around or about him remained at the same level as the ones in the first episode. But looking at the series as a whole, we can see he was actually given a chance to prove himself as a leader, and that gave him confidence. He no longer desired outside validation, since he essentially got it in the form of at least one close friend who clearly saw him for who he was, Ken, and a team that believes in him. Armed with that, he was finally ready to be a hero at the end, because only he was single-minded and stubborn enough to overcome their final obstacle. In the end, Daisuke is a simple character, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't undergo growth. He's a reminder you shouldn't judge a person on their worst day, but in the context of their everyday. There may be a lot of good to them that goes overlooked.